there, and welcome to another episode of The Divorce Couch. My name is Claire, and I'm a divorce coach in Northern Ireland.
I am Salma, and I'm a divorce coach based in London.
My name is Simone, and I'm the divorce coach based in Germany.
So today we decided to look at a topic that kind of affects us all, really. It's what do we do when circumstances outside our control come into our inside world? So I suppose we're looking at couples that are together that, before you get to a breakup or a divorce journey and life is going along in whatever way that it does and everything seems fine, and suddenly something happens, whether it is something like one of you loses your job, or there's been a tragic accident and somebody like a parent or something, is injured or killed in an accident, something that is quite big that impacts how we as humans respond to the world, but that then has an impact on how we communicate with each other. And one of the sort of biggest things that comes to mind for us now is COVID. And COVID changed people's ability for their normal life because people have ended up working at home. They have ended up having to do childcare at home, juggling at home. So suddenly the normal dynamics in a relationship for communication pathways that we have as what works kind of get thrown out the window. And what do we do then? Because we all as humans react differently because of the pathways that we've come from. And as divorce coaches, we would call it your map of the world. So our maps of the world are different because we come from different backgrounds. And sometimes it takes big events. My gosh, like, why is he doing that? Or why is she doing that? Because we haven't needed to see this part of our reaction ability. And that has an impact in our ability to communicate. And what do we do with that when that comes in? Because I think that's just life. And life has a habit of interrupting quite dramatically sometimes. So that's what we're looking at today. And I'll just open it up to you ladies and see where we go with that.
Yeah, I think it's a really relevant topic at the moment because so much has happened in the last couple of years that I think it's brought a lot of additional stresses into people's lives. And, I'm hearing more and more from clients that, where prior to this, we were able to maybe ignore the cracks in our relationship, either whether that was communication or, a value system or, a number of things that when, we are presented with additional stress, how do we manifest that stress and how do we direct that stress? And if we're not aware of what we're doing, sometimes that can hugely impact your relationship, and it becomes very much, obviously, sometimes we're looking for support from the people that are closest to us, and sometimes that isn't always readily available. And sometimes it can be because they don't know how to support you because you're not vocalizing what you need from that relationship. So for me, I think, a really important factor before we start suddenly thinking this relationship is over, I don't want to be in this. And yes, there are circumstances in which that may be the case. But I think it's really to look at where is that additional conflict and stress coming from? And can I find a way to address it? Is it really about the relationship, or is it really about the additional stress that I'm not, or we are not? Because it's never just an I'm, it's always a we. Are we just not managing or addressing the issues that are here in front of us? Things like, if one party loses their job, that can create a huge financial pressure on the family, but there's also other factors going on here around self-esteem and confidence of the partner that's lost that role. And that can, how that individual manages that stress can be quite crucial to what happens over the next couple of months or couple of years. So it's really about looking below the surface and not just looking at the surface level issues, but trying to dig slightly deeper.
What you just said, it's not about I, but it's also about we. I immediately thought, no, but it's a lot about I. It could be that I think I cannot continue like this because we as a couple don't cope, but maybe I don't look inwards enough. And then I basically divert my personal inability to handle what is happening on the outside. And then very often I just divert it immediately and think, oh, it's the partnership. I mean, how often, just to give you an example, it happens that there is something that's not sitting well with me, and then my child does something, and then I just basically immediately, you know what, it's because of you. You know what, when you hurt your toe, and then if my child just happens to walk in, my poor man, you know, I said,
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Definitely not.
Yeah, I hear that all the time. You're just angry at something else, mummy, and you're taking it out on me. And I'm like, oh, yeah, maybe that is true.
Yeah, guilty. So yes, it has also to do with looking inwards. And we not only had COVID, and of course I have to admit, 2022, I think many of us have not had so much challenge that is out of our control in a long time. And we have the Ukraine war. It's been 6 weeks. You know what, we just came out of in Germany, you know, you just were at the end of thinking, okay, good, COVID, we kind of, you know, are at the end of the fourth wave. Then the war breaks out. That's a huge stressor on a couple. And I think, was it you, Summer, when you said the cracks, if the cracks are there, and if communication is something that you haven't established, this is now the time where the cracks will show, and communication will be crucial to your relationship. But, and here's the thing, it still is not the reason to walk away from the relationship. I remember, and I mean, we didn't make it, but when we walked into a couple therapy, my husband and I thought, you know what, before I start from fresh, I might as well start fresh in the couple.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
You know what? I mean, that's the decision I can only make. You know what? My ex-husband was on a different journey, and that's fine. But you know what? There's not necessarily a reason if something on the outside really challenges us to the core, and it is exhausting at the moment. Yeah. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to walk away from the partnership.
Yeah, and I think it's important when we talk about communication. I think one of the things that I learned during my training in transactional analysis, which I thought was really interesting, the line that I use a lot with my clients, is we walked away with, do you always say what you mean and mean what you say? So a lot of the times we fall into these patterns where we're saying one thing, but we actually mean something completely different. And what we're expecting is that the other person is going to be able to decode the words that we've used, you know. So I think the first step with communication is to actually start saying what it is you actually want to communicate, because the other party hears the words, but if they're not understanding what you're trying to say, then you need
context.
You need to maybe change the way that you're saying it, or maybe try a different angle. But very often, I know definitely in my case, and I'm not saying this is easy, I was always very worried about my ex-husband's reactions. And so therefore, even if I was feeling something, I wouldn't necessarily express it, but then there would be a resentment afterwards that, oh, well, but why, you know, why doesn't he know that I'm upset? Mm-hmm. But actually looking back, I wasn't brave enough to express that. So it's understandable that because I haven't expressed that something has upset me, why do I then have an expectation that he is capable of knowing that he has done something to upset me?
Do you think that any of that could be around not having the right language for something? Because yes. Sometimes I look back and I think, you know, like that same situation, you know, I would have been thinking something and then getting, well, why did he do that? He knows this. And actually, I think when I look back, I think I didn't have the language to say things in a way that had a better chance of being heard.
Yep.
And that's what we as divorce coaches can help people with, is what is the best situation for your voice to be heard in a way that the other person can actually hear it.
Yes.
So they're saying something and there's somebody hearing it, and they're both very different things. And if you have something like, let's say, a job loss, for example. So we talked about the fact that there's the financial implications, there's the identity implication, and that person may very well shut down and go inwards because they don't know how to process this, because that's all they've ever known. And say it's the man and they feel like they should be providing for their family, and there's that sense of, well, now what's my role? And the partner or the wife is thinking, well, why won't you talk to me? And so you have this big thing. But actually, what if the wife, the partner who's still, it's not them that's lost their job, is able to say, there's two ways of saying something. One is, you're not talking to me. It's really like, what's going on? How can I help you? That's one level of conversation. Another level of conversation is, I feel really sad because I don't know what's going on with you, and I would really like to help, but I don't know how to. The sentiment is the same in the two sentences, but the way it is heard or translated is very different. And we get into patterns because that's all we know. And a lot of our, I suppose, maybe conflict resolution is a word for part of this, because we end up with the conflict, this tension, tug of war. And a lot of that is what we have seen as we've grown up. So we only can outwork in some ways what we've seen and know to work. But if our partner has come from a family that didn't talk about things, they don't know anything different. They don't know how to say any of this.
Yeah.
And that is what we can do for our clients, is see what they can't see, to try and enable conversation in a different way. And going right back to what you said, Simone, I would agree completely. If a couple is married and they have invested time, emotional energy, money, expectations, dreams, hopes, future in getting married, surely this part of what's going on deserves the same investment.
Yes.
So is it worth saving? Can it be saved? How do we do this? Rather than, this just isn't working and I can't live like this.
Yeah.
So that's the result of what you're feeling, which is disconnected.
Yeah.
The beauty, sorry.
Go ahead, Simone.
And the beauty is, it doesn't have to be the two of you, initiating the next step.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm really entertaining split separation. You know what? You're already with one foot outside of that unit. There's always the opportunity. And that actually applies to all relationships. I've had that with my mother. It doesn't necessarily mean that both people have to invest 100% in change. Very often, and you said that, Claire, with the husband who lost his job, sometimes it's okay if one person just changes the way they approach the other person. So there is saying, and then there is listening and hearing, right? You can again, try to apply whatever you feel might improve the conversation between the two of you.
Yeah.
There's all these different, the approach that you just mentioned, which is a lot about you, and you just had this beautiful example. You know what? Don't do the you, begin with the I. It has a lot to do with feelings. And if you've done that, and I've seen that with my mother, for example, I have opened up a pathway, because I basically, let me rephrase it. I released her from being the perpetrator, right? Very often in relationships, you feel like the victim, and then it's the other person's fault for whatever is going wrong. You know what? I know that we have a personality that we chose. It's our autopilot, but you know what? Very often, if we then release the other person from the responsibility of things not working the way we feel it's supposed to go, and then if you change it, the other person then can step into a different avenue. And all of a sudden, it becomes a whole new level of relationship. And it can happen in a relationship. It can happen with your wife, with your husband, but it also can happen.
You open a sense of possibilities, don't you? There is a possibility for something new that comes from a different conversation.
Yeah.
I think that is probably, for this episode, really empowering. You know what? You don't necessarily have to be two in your marriage to now have a look. What do we need to do for it to become better? You know what? If you want to make a change, it starts with you.
Yeah. And I think that's like you said, Claire, all of this time that you've invested in the relationship, it makes sense that you would put, a fair amount of effort. And I think the one thing that was really important for me in my own situation was I wanted some sort of clarification that I would not wake up in 5 years' time and regret my decision.
Yes.
I wanted to try everything possible to make my relationship work, because I was terrified that I would wake up in 5 years' time and think, oh, if I tried that, maybe. And obviously that maybe would have been irrelevant at that point in time. And yes, I did get to a point where I, reached a point where I thought to myself, actually, I have nothing more to give or nothing more to try. But it allowed me to walk away from that relationship. I wouldn't say satisfied, because obviously we're never satisfied in that situation. It's a breakdown of a relationship. But on a personal level, I knew that actually I was content that this relationship for me was well and truly over, and that there was nothing else that I could have tried to have salvaged it.
Important for the children. You are a role model, right? You know what? You don't just. Sometimes I feel, we are in a world where we, if something is not working, we just, dispose it and buy a new pair of trainers or a new phone. You know what? This is how our consumerism life has been directed. And I think, that is something we should apply in relationship.
And I think that's where divorce coaches also come in, because people have an assumption that, a divorce coach is there to help you get divorced. Actually, this is one thing that I talk to a lot of my clients about. If they're able to come to me before obviously they've made that decision, we can help them work through that journey to make a decision. And it's not for us to advise them whether they should get divorced or whether they shouldn't get divorced, regardless of our personal opinions of that situation. Our role is to help them work through the emotions and that they're going through, so that they can make the decision that's right for them.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the things that I would say to my clients is, if you're willing to take an investment to work with me, I don't know where we will be after 6 sessions, but after 6 sessions, I can guarantee you won't be here.
Yeah.
Because we won't know what will unfold as the journey goes on. We won't know that if us working together and changing conversation ability, and we don't know the outcome of what that's going to be like for the partner. That's the unknown. But when we focus on what we can control and what we do, we get more information, and that helps to make a better, clearer, stronger decision. But, when I've been thinking and listening to what we've been talking about and using the example of somebody losing their job, we don't know that maybe they're in their background, the only way that they received a sense of being from their parents was because of what they did. So suddenly their sense of purpose of being has just dissolved in front of them, and they feel a failure, and they're ashamed of that. And if we add those emotions into a whole entire world that has had COVID, where fear has heightened and people are afraid to go out, and we don't have communication, and they can't go and meet somebody for a walk or a pint in the pub or something to have the ability to outwork it and talk it through and help them, or they can't go and speak to somebody face to face, everything's on Zoom, but they were on Zoom all day with meetings. That has created another layer of, I think, heightening the negativity of the experience of the job loss. That before we had COVID, maybe the management styles would have been different. But I think, we need to look at the communication breakdowns in marriage in the view of the lens of glasses that we've had over 2 years of this world that we haven't known how to do. And I personally believe we're made for connection as humans. I just think that we are. And when we have a disconnect, it rocks our core. And, I look at my children and I'm trying to teach them, you sign up for tennis lessons, you pay up, you're not quitting after 2. We'll get you to the 10 that you've paid for, and then you can make a decision. So if I'm teaching my child that and I'm having all of this stuff and I'm thinking I'm just walking away, well, what are we teaching and what are we doing? And these are life lessons and life skills. But the thing that came out really strongly listening to Salma, especially what you were saying is, if you walk away, you're still walking away as the you that you are. So actually, the chances of this happening again at some point with somebody else in the future are very high, because communication breakdown happens because there's two people. But if you as a one person don't look to see, well, what's my part of this? What am I responsible for? How can I help change this? How can I find out what I need? And then when I find out what I need, find the way to communicate it. And maybe the need is that I learn how to meet it myself. Then I bring me with all of that into my next relationship.
But it could be, right, that going back to what I said is, yes, it could be that things will change because you...
Absolutely.
But there is a chance that the other person is not there yet, right? It could.
I have an evidence pathway that some of my clients have stayed really well and haven't separated when they thought they would have, because they have learned how to see things differently.
Yes.
But it can go either way. I mean, I have heard couples, and the podcasts are full of them. There are couples that really found their strength again because of the COVID.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are others, they just broke. So basically it can go in either direction. But picking up on what you just said, Summer, we want to make sure that you know whatever you're taking towards the relationship or away from the relationship, you own it. I remember that a friend of mine, before we went into this final conversation, she said, you know what, I want you to know it's important that you, and when you face your children later, that you've tried everything, right? That's something that you for yourself can decide. And that's the control you have over, right? You have no control over what COVID and its rules are doing to your family or to your relationship, but you still have control over how you want to handle it, right? And then it brings us into this mindfulness place, right? You know, when you realize, oh God, I keep thinking of separations. What is actually happening? And there are beautiful podcasts at the moment out there that help couples, you know what, to navigate. I mean, of course, you know what, there's us and there's divorce coaches, but there is also so much beautiful content at the moment that you can listen to and you can apply. It's kind of like books that you can read and see, you know, what can I possibly do? When I feel something is really, really, really not working out for me. What I have done though is, because I think, was it Claire, was it you at the beginning? No, or Sama, there are a couple of things that I want to read out. The last thing we want to do is, because there is this, I love this term, toxic positivity. You know what?
Absolutely, yeah.
Not fix certain things. There is certain behavior that is intolerable, and that's nothing that you want to coach yourself on in accepting a certain behavior. And if you are okay with me, I have two sources. We have, of course, the Gottman Institute, who have done these long-term observations of couples, and they have come across 4 traits where they call it the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, where they say, you know what, if this is what we see what couples do, or one of them, then this is a guarantee that the relationship is not lasting. And it's criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. So, you know what, you can also observe your relationship. And if you try, and if this is what is happening in your relationship, you know what, you don't
also observe yourself.
Yes.
Are you doing any of these things? Because it becomes very easy when we're unhappy and a relationship is not working to point the finger at the other party. Yeah. It's very easy to fall into the trap is, oh, it's somebody else's fault. It's your fault. You do this. You don't listen to me. You don't care about me. You don't love me. But we need to really stop and think, like Claire said earlier, what part am I playing in this? You know, if you do you have the right boundaries in place, both personally and in your relationship and in your work? You know, what are the stresses that are creating more stress in your relationship? And are you actually doing anything about them?
Oh, but that's a funny thing, right? I mean, how often when I researched, what happened in my partnership, who am I, who is the other person, the amount of times I thought, oh, that's me. I just diagnosed myself all over the place. I said, okay, that's so important.
Yeah. I mean, if you've got a stressful job and you're coming home and you're irritated and angry and, what are you doing about that? Because only you can change that, right? Are you going to, manage your work better? Are you going to, worst case scenario, change your jobs because it's having such an impact on your personal life? Are you going to go out there and do a bout of boxercise before you come home so that you've released all of your stress?
Yeah, get rid of the tension.
Right? There are things that we can do to manage our own responses. And, because I know that I can sometimes personally, I take on quite a lot of responsibilities and stresses, and then I end up, and I become quite aware of this, that I end up, it's almost like a shotgun. So whoever gets in the way, then, it's like they get shot with the stresses, and it's got nothing to do with them. So they often think, oh, what did I do? I only said, hello, how are you? And I have had to learn that, I need to recognize when life is getting too much for me. I need to recognize when I am directing my stresses at, I wouldn't say innocent parties. My children are never innocent parties, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Really?
How can I manage that so that I'm not redirecting it at people that don't deserve it?
Yeah. But you know what, let me just continue with that I love Esther Perel, and I want to say what she's saying. It doesn't necessarily, and I'm picking up what you just said, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the other party. Look at it and say, you know what, especially criticism is one that we probably are all guilty of very quickly. You know what, how much of that is in me? So Esther Perel says basically what she finds very difficult, because she is a hypnotherapist, indifference basically is when you feel the other person is not fundamentally caring about you, or you don't care about them. Like coldness, estrangement creeps in, which leads to disconnection. And you know what, if the disconnection is gone. So I've just listened to an episode the other day, and it was a couple that remarried for a second time. And it was beautiful, because then she said, you know what, if you argue, and she brought back in the connection is basically touch the other person while you argue. And we have something that we do with children. It's 2 sticks which are covered in foam, and you're supposed to hold your child's hand, and then basically that child can hit you and get out the anger and say, I hate you, but you are still connected. I think that is so beautiful, and you can do the same as a parent.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, maybe the next time I'm just going to quickly show.
I can't say I'd be tempted to hide something within the foam.
And the foam.
I'm not condoning violence. I'm just in my imaginary world.
But you know what? That is basically you're still. You haven't.
Yes. What you're doing is giving a safe space for emotions to be explored, aren't you? And tension to come out. Yeah. And that's one of the things that I really feel strongly about, that for us as a person, so for me as a person, if I become vulnerable and say to somebody, actually, this happened to me, I give them permission to be vulnerable back. And that's what change in communication does. It opens the possibility for something different. And we don't know what that difference will be, but the possibility is now there compared to the blaming or the criticalness or the whatever. And that's what I noted. And that's within my control. I have control to do that.
But then she also talks about contempt, the degradation, you're nothing, neglect, when people take each other for granted. After marrying, they go into the place of complacency and laziness. Violence. We've just had the Oscars. Violence. No. Violence. End of story. What else? When you're talking about the work, sex. And sex is such a thing for couples. I remember that was basically one of the things that always stood between my ex-husband and I. And if that is something that is being mentioned, then you have to look at why that is. You know what, both parties. Sex is so much more than just the orgasm. It's just basically also to be connected, to want to be with the other person. And I think both parties then have to talk about it. It's like, well, what is just happening? How are we so lost in our relationship that we no longer have the desire to connect also on the physical level, right? Where is the mystery and the erotic in our relationship? And I think that is something that has gone very quickly. And you talked about how important vocabulary is. And I came across a study, and it's crazy. I think apparently most of the people only know 3 feelings. And I think it's this love and anger. And I don't even know what the third one is, but it's so gone. And for many, I think it's a very typical thing, is to them, a relationship is okay if there is sexuality involved. But then we have to talk about it, right? Because you know what, if you feel as a wife or as the woman, there is so much more to me in the relationship. There is sex and that. You know what, that we have to look at as well. And I think especially in COVID, or if there's a job loss, if we really feel to the core, we're so lost. You know what, there's no more I'm only giving. And I don't seem to fulfill the job as a provider. I don't have any me time. I think especially as a single parent, we know that, right? You know what, at 8 o'clock, you're just tired. You know, where is the me time? But if there is no me time, there is no desire. And we need that in a relationship as well. And then we have to create it when we have to become creative and see how do we get that in. I am guilty, and I say that, and I wish I would still talk to my husband. I would love to look him in the eye. I said, I'm so sorry that I got so lost in my mothership role. I wish I would have listened more to you. And I can't believe I say this, makes me really emotional, because I know he was longing to have that partnership time. And I think as a husband, when the mother has the children, she has so much physical touch, and there is so much love that is coming back through the baby. And then the man very often just bystands, and then again, where am I? And I wish I would have, you know what, I would have asked him and listened to him, and he probably would have said, you know what, I'm missing us. And I would have wanted me to then be listening and hearing. I said, okay, good. Then this is not what I have to bring to the table. I have to be there for you in order to not get lost. And I think then from there, it very quickly, and I think this is after you've had children, is one of those moments when a partnership and marriage very quickly dissolves, because you know what, there you forget the we. You know what did,
and I think, you know,
got to put us together.
Listening to what you've said, that's why it becomes so important to, like you said, to not only listen, but to actually hear. But in order to hear, we need to be saying what we actually want to say.
That's
we can't assume that, you know, through our, because sometimes what happens through our mood swings, through our tiny sort of strops, or, you know, these little clues that we kind of leave, like, you know, personally, that the other person's understanding what is the problem here. If we're not vocalizing that and making ourselves clear, and the other person is not hearing us, then there's a breakdown of communication here.
Yeah. And looking at emotions, you know, anger is an emotion, and you think, I'm really angry and upset with you because of this. But what's behind the anger and the upset? Is it a sense of loss? Is it a sense of sadness? Because it's what's behind the anger, that if that part has a voice, that's what somebody is more likely to hear, because the anger is blaming, it's critical, it's, you know, you haven't done, I have. So if we are able to look behind something, that's where we find the words, because the emotion behind that is about us. I am experiencing this deep longing, this sadness. That's a different way of explaining something to somebody that allows me to feel like I have the best chance of being heard, because I'm being real. And sometimes that's not safe. And sometimes that in itself is a red flag. Maybe it's not possible, but it's being able to understand the world that you're in that allows you to be able to move forward in whatever direction that looks like.
Yeah.
But I do go back to where we started with this, which is, you know, we invest in being married and being in a partnership. And before something dissolves, surely it deserves the investment to find out what is salvageable, what is findable, what can be made better, what can be improved upon, what are we willing to compromise on. Maybe both parties have to compromise, but if we don't look at it and nobody knows what the other person wants with their expectations, maybe that's never going to happen. So investing in getting clarity around, there's a discommunication, there's a disconnect in the connection. Why is that? What is that about? And what can we do? What can I do as my part of this? And then what are the effects that when I start to look at this and I start to take different action, different words, what's the outworking? And where does that lead us?
Yeah.
And a divorce, a separation, you know, it won't be easy. I mean, it is change, full stop, on every possible level. It sounds maybe because I mean, we hear it, divorce rates are going up, but it's just so common to separate. But you know what, you've got to be aware. I mean, not that I'm saying, you know what, it is, sometimes it's just over, but it's not a walk in the park. It is gonna be a really, really difficult situation. And one thing is for sure, if communication was something you didn't have in a partnership, the divorce is going to be really, really difficult. So then we come to the point that if you feel, okay, maybe it's the time to separate, you want to bring the partnership to the level that you walk away not on rage, anger, and frustration. You want to make sure at least you have come to the conclusion and said it's just not working, but you do it to bring back the beautiful words scarcity and abundance. You want to leave out of abundance. You want to leave out of love for the other person. You are okay the way you are, and I am okay the way I am. It's just that us together doesn't work anymore. Instead of leaving and saying, you're wrong, I am right, I'm out.
Yeah.
That will have such a huge impact on how the divorce will unfold.
Yeah. And ultimately, if you choose to stay or you choose to separate, it actually doesn't matter who's wrong or right.
Yes.
No, it's about owning where you are, isn't it?
In true essence, there will be things that you've both done wrong, and there'll be things that you both feel you've done right. And, you know, to be able to let go of, I need someone to take ownership, or the other party to say, sit there and, you know, accept that what they've done is wrong, then you're not going to get to a solution, because that isn't the solution.
Yeah. I mean, morally, there will be, you know what, we all have our own moral compass, and then the other.
What is right for one person. And you know, and the one thing that I think, because of my corporate background, I always think to myself, you know, just because we've done something one way doesn't mean we have to continue doing it that way. You know, absolutely not. In my job, you know, 20 years in corporate IT, I felt like I was good at my job, but I still had a yearly appraisal where my manager would sit down with me and say, like, this is working, this isn't working, this is what we need to improve on, this is what we need to, you know, do better next time, this is what we need to do less of or more of. But very often, you know, we go into a marriage, we never stop to think, well, actually, what's working for me and what's not working?
Oh, but I'm so with you. It's kind of like the Disney, it's kind of like happily ever after. No.
You know, everything, you know, your relationship, you need to be taking regularly stock of what is working and what isn't working, and what can I improve and what can I change and what will make me happy.
And if we do it in our work world, why don't we do it in the rest of our life?
Exactly. You know, and we do it in lots of other areas of our life, but then we just assume that, you know, we're married now and this is going to just plod along forever. And then suddenly one day we think, oh, this is not quite working for me. But at what point have you stopped to take stock of what isn't working?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to bring it to a wrap up, ladies. And I think the essence of everything that we've said and sort of packaged together is it comes back to the question, are you stuck in a place where life isn't working for you in your relationship? Can you resonate with that? Can you identify with that as a listener of this episode? And if that is you, have we given you any tools, any directional pathways of how to help you to become unstuck? Because the best gift you can give your future, whatever that future is going to look like, is recognizing where you are and doing something about that. But if you don't know where you are starting from, you can't go forward. You stay stuck. And then the choice is yours. You stay stuck and unhappy and everybody's unhappy, or you recognize that you're stuck and you go, what am I going to do about this? Because I can do something. I, on my own, can take responsibility for my part, and I'm choosing to do that because I want to invest to see where this can go. And those are the questions we'd like to leave you with today. So we'd love you to hit the like and subscribe button. Thank you so much for listening. And hopefully something out of some of the different things that we've all brought to the table today will resonate. And we look forward to you joining us again on the next episode of The Divorce Couch. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.